Today, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Liz Stevenson, who is the Transition Manager at Sandwell Metropolitan Borough Council, a very large local authority in the Midlands. Sandwell has about 90 primary and 20 secondary schools, so that keeps Liz pretty busy. Today, we'd like to ask Liz about her insights into transition from primary to secondary school and what can be done, in her opinion, perhaps to improve the process. So thank you for joining me here today. Thanks, Liz.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Sue.
So listen, what exactly is a transition manager?
Well, it's quite a good question because it's quite unique in what it is.
Yes.
But generally, plans across all of our schools. So it's trying to link all of our schools together. As you've said, we are a huge local authority with a number of schools, whether they are maintained or academy trusts or even standalone academies. We've got quite a few of those. So my job is to keep I call it the trunk of transition, if you like. So we've got a strategy that runs through all of our schools, and then each of their individual schools do what is necessary for those, for their cohorts, their children, with those schools as well, just to see how I can dip in and support the process, really. It's extending the transition process, so I tend to work from around year 5 to year 8 as well, so it means that there's somebody who's just looking out for the bigger picture when obviously schools have got an awful lot more to do during other times of the year. There's somebody in the background continuing on the transition treadmill, if you like, keep things running and hopefully keep things running smoothly.
How interesting that is. I mean, that's not many schools that do that, or many boroughs that have that. So I find that really, really interesting. So why do you think that Sandwell then created this role, and what prompted you to take it?
I think, again, it's down to the number of schools, which is why, as an authority, they decided that somebody just coordinating a process would be really good. Of our kind of 19 mainstream schools that we've got with Key Stage 3 provision, on average, they take children from about 45, 40. We've got one school that, at the last count, I think it was 76 primaries, all from the same borough. So having somebody there to just streamline things so that the process, so that everybody knows exactly what they're going to get. And there's just somebody there, again, monitoring that kind of transition treadmill all the way through the years. It's really been helpful to have somebody to say, right, let's look at this streamlined approach, so that one school isn't getting something very different to another and maybe losing out on something somewhere along the lines.
So what sort of things do you do? What is good practice then?
Well, one of the things that we've done, I've been in post for 4 years, and one of the things that we have done is we have managed to secure one data collection system that all of our schools use. So rather than each secondary using their own system and it going out at various times after my date comes in, actually everybody's using the same. So the primary schools can start populating that a lot earlier. And the form itself was in the borough before I started, but it was used very sporadically. So all I've done is kind of use something that was already there, and it's really, really helpful. And then we managed to get a lot of communication between the schools. And again, it's just having somebody who's kind of at the top of a tree, if you like, bringing everybody together.
Yes, and looking out for good practice, as well as perhaps supporting those that are not doing it quite so well.
Exactly.
So tell me, in your opinion then, what is the potential consequences of a poor transition process? Let's start with, say, secondary schools. I mean, tell me about that.
There's so many things, isn't there, really, that you can go there. I mean, I think if we start with children,
yes,
then you've got the obvious of the stress levels are through the roof. You've got gaps in attainment. You've got new people to learn about, and you've got new rules and ways of working that you've got to try and manage. And you, as a child, you just hope and accept that your secondary school know you as well as your primary school did.
Gosh,
and that's simply
takes time.
I think also poor transition massively can affect the staff as well.
Right.
Not got enough of the right details about the child. Again, with all the best will in the world, if I'm a year 7 teacher and I've got, let's say, 6 new classes of year 7s that I'm going to see in the next week, that's an awful lot of new things to learn immediately with very little information. So that the transition information is key to staff as quickly as possible, not just a transition lead or a head of year. There's so much in-class information that's really, really important to help relationships build.
Yes. I mean, is that the first place to start, the relationship, not worrying so much then necessarily initially, of course, around the sort of the academic side to affect the behaviour? Is it relationship building that makes us secure? A sense of belonging, I feel, and community. Is that important?
Yeah, I think it's very important because they've gone from 6 years of having that very strong, as you say, community feel, and they're part of, in some cases, a family, and they've been very well looked after.
Yeah.
And if you're a larger family, you may even had connections with your primary school for an awful lot longer if you've got brothers or sisters that have been there, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into the mix of somewhere completely new. And children do thrive on relationships. They do want to please the people that spend a lot of time with them, and they go from that member of staff spending all day every day with them to, maybe the last school I worked in, my year 7 classes I had every other week. So it's you go from once or twice a week maybe.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult, and we're asking children to try and forge relationships with people they just don't know.
Because often, as you know, I was a deputy head, and even the caretaker and the cooks all know the kids and go, how's your mum now after the new baby? And here's your cardigan. And how's your brother doing? I taught him a few years back. Suddenly then, it's not that, secondary schools don't care. It's just a different structure initially, and a different way of working and a different way of being. And, the expectations change, don't they, for the children as well? They're expected to do more from themselves and be more independent. So, primary schools, of course, they prepare their children, but we've had a difficult time, haven't we? So they seem to vary, don't they, in many other boroughs, not your borough by the sound of it, in the preparation that they give to year 6 children. Why do you think that is, and what could people watching this video learn from perhaps the work that you do?
I think, with credit to year 6 staff and primary schools, year 6 is so incredibly busy.
Yes.
You hit the ground running in September, trying to make sure you've got all the curriculum coverage, which is still enormous. You're trying to prepare children for a new way of working with SATs and making sure that they get through those. And then once that's done, you've still got writing to finish. And then I think primary schools do a really good job of ending with a bang and preparing the children to leave, but not necessarily preparing for the next step. And I understand that. I understand it's kind of right. We need to make their primary school experience something they remember for the rest of their lives. So I get and completely understand why it might kind of fall on the back burner a little bit. An absolute a doddle thing to solve there is actually start getting them ready in year 5.
Yes.
Start talking secondary school in year 5.
Yeah.
Start thinking about the changes.
And it's also for parents to start thinking about that in year 5, because you don't suddenly get independent and confident. It's incremental. So if parents as well can start preparing their children to take on a bit more responsibility for different things in their lives, then that move to secondary isn't such a shock, is it really?
No, and I think when we talk about responsibilities, it's the different type of responsibilities as well, isn't it? Children are very, very independent at year 6.
Yeah.
And they are very capable of managing their own time in a classroom and working independently without kind of somebody needing to breathe over their shoulder. But it's a very different level of independence, and it's different expectations. And you're right, parents can start that at an earlier age and give them, rather than micromanaging everything that happens at home, for example. Timekeeping is something the children are going to have to learn about very, very quickly when they get to secondary, whereas everything is managed for them at primary and at home. You know, you're told when it's break and you go back to the same classroom. You haven't got to work out how long it's going to take you, for example, to get from the playground to your door, because it's just done and you go to the same place. Whereas one of our secondary schools is kind of 1,800 children. It's a massive site. All of our schools are really big, to be fair. So you've got children that might hang around on a tennis court, for example, but then their classroom at the end of the break is a good 3 or 4 minute walk away, and they're used to the bell going and then being on top of the classroom. So yes, little things like this, and helping at home to kind of say, right, let's look at, let's set a time. I want you downstairs at 10:45. I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to give you a warning. You're responsible. I need you downstairs at 10:45.
Yeah, so there's ways that parents can build in a bit of autonomy and a bit more independence for them. I'm very interested in your role, because it strikes me as I talk about the bridge between primary and secondary. Now, we often know that the kids are getting prepared in year 6, sort of emotionally and all the rest of it, and academically. Is there a better way, because you have that experience now, that year 7s could come down to the primary school to meet the kids in their own environment? Is there any way that year 7, when they're in there, could come back and see their year 6 teachers and talk about the work that they've been doing? Is there a bit of a problem that people in year 7 think, oh, well, we've got to start again because they've been in year 6, but we need to start all over again? What are the tips that you would say that would build a very successful bridge across that transition?
I think that lots of schools already do little bits of that. Even when my children started, they had letters from kind of year 7 and year 8 children to let them know what school would be like. But they
do that more on video now.
That's kind of a positive of everything that's happened lately, isn't it? We're all doing this now, and we're all talking more, and because the big drawback and the big problem with taking year 7s back to their year 6 kind of cohorts, if you like, it's time. It's then time out, curriculum time out, it's staff time out to take them, and it's how you're going to get there. But the idea of doing it on video is great.
Sorry,
No, that's all right.
I talked over you, but I'm very, very interested in, if people invest, and this is why we've created this program, if people invest properly in a really positive, confident transition, what do you think the benefits are long term to their education, to their well-being, to the whole school, to academic success, as well as everything else?
So it's so important to get it right from day one. In fact, before day one of walking through the door, because it's that old adage, isn't it? First impressions last.
Yes.
And actually, if the first impression that a child gets of a school walking through those school gates is fear and terror, that's going to stay with them.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue. And I think, what you and I have talked before about the idea that children are used to being themselves in front of a member of staff that knows them very, very well. All of a sudden, they've got to be themselves in front of teachers that might not necessarily appreciate their candid humour or their shyness or their quietness. And we don't always, as adults, we just kind of expect everybody around us to get us and get that actually we don't like that, or we're quite happy to be chatty, and it's I've seen too many children over the years that in the first couple of weeks have been themselves. They've been chatty, they've had a bit of a laugh, they've had a bit of a banter with a member of staff because that's what they're used to, but then that particular member of staff they're doing it with doesn't see it in the same view, and then they start getting consequences, or they start having some sort of relationship breakdown, and that can go on and on and on.
So what's the advice for kids in that situation then? How do we prepare kids for that?
I think we need to warn them, and we need to start saying to them that actually, not everybody's going to get on with you the way I do. And, as a year 6 teacher, it's kind of that idea that you're going to have lots and lots of different teachers. And while I think that, you and I have lots of chats, and that's absolutely brilliant, and some teachers will want that, others won't. it's about the adults in their life helping them find, I call it their appropriate version of themselves.
Yes, yeah, tell us more, that's good.
Because there's that idea that, you know, I had one teacher when I was at school, and you just didn't breathe too loudly.
Yeah.
Because if you did, all hell would break loose. And I discovered that to my detriment when I'm quite a chatty person, as you can probably tell. Early days of year 7, there I am chatting to my friends about the work, because that's how I'm used to working.
Yes,
I'm used to group work. I'm used to ask your friend before you ask the teacher. So I do that. And then all of a sudden I can't do that anymore. So it's about asking the children to just take those few little steps, learn the environment you're in, start to get a feel for where you are. And then you'll learn how the right version of yourself to be for that particular member of staff. But the staff need to be mindful of that as well.
And the parents.
Absolutely. And especially parents that have maybe never had any problems at school with their child before, and all of a sudden their child's getting into lots of trouble. That doesn't mean that child is doing anything wrong. There's just some support that's needed to say, well, hang on, let's go into school and let's say, right, take away the consequences and the trouble. Let's look at why this is happening. Is it happening everywhere? Is it happening in every classroom?
Is it a certain teacher or a certain subject?
And role play from parents as well.
Yeah. Now, what do you say? I mean, parental engagement is massively important, but what do you say to parents who didn't really enjoy school, not very keen on coming in? As a teacher myself, those parents, they obviously had a bad old time at school and they're not sure about things. What sort of advice would you give those parents?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it, that, because there's an element of, I think the school almost need to send out the olive branch in a more appropriate way, maybe. If a parent isn't continually coming into school, then do more things over the phone, do maybe possible home visits. The video calls now, with even if you haven't got a laptop, you may have a phone. We had problems this morning, didn't we? And one of the options was, should we get the phone out and try with the phone?
And there's all sorts of apps, isn't there, that communicate now with families.
Yeah.
But it's about breaking down the walls and building the bridges. This is what I'm very interested in. And what could schools do better, perhaps, in your opinion, that perhaps they don't always think to do?
I think the first thing, at a secondary level, if you've got a parent that's not engaging very well, contact the primary school. Is that the norm? Right. Were they difficult to engage through primary? If they were, you've probably got a slightly bigger battle on your hand. If they weren't, what prompted the engagement? What did the primary school do that maybe the secondary school aren't doing? Because it's a very different system. Parents are so used to being on the playground and having daily contact with a member of staff and knowing exactly who to talk to. I think the big thing as well at secondary is you've gone from knowing exactly who your child year 6 teacher is, so you know exactly who you need to talk to, I think I need to speak to the history teacher, but I can't remember his name. I don't really know who I need to call. And then maybe even you call reception, but without a name, who you want to talk to, or a system. And systems are very different. Do you need to speak to the class teacher? Should you go to a head of year? Should you go to a pastoral manager? Do you need to be going to a head of house? Schools need to make that very, very clear, which I think they do. I'm not saying secondary schools don't do that already, but maybe it's just that, well, I've not met this person. Yeah. And actually, I don't like the idea of going in for the first time.
Yeah, it's a bit intimidating. Yes. And I know that, we're talking about transition generally. I'm very interested that I'd like to get your take home messages about what are they for parents, for teachers, for children. And I am mindful we are living in very unusual circumstances that aren't going to go away too quickly. What pieces of advice would you offer schools at this time?
I think patience is most key to everything at the moment. I think patience is very important in the early days anyway, but this year more than any other. The vast majority of children have not been in school since March. In our borough, we didn't have a huge take-up of going back to year 6 because the space wasn't there for a lot of it as much as anything. And so lots and lots of these children are long-term out of school and haven't had the preparation that they may well have had before. They won't have had all the guidance. They won't have had all the opportunity to let their fears out to their year 6 teachers. So there's going to be a lot of kind of fear involved and lots of changes that are coming, and we need to kind of almost take a step back and say, right, let's let them get settled before we go too far on things. But I think we need to be aware as well, there's lots of staff that may not have been in since March.
Yes.
You know, we'll have a lot of adults that we need to be concerned about as well and looking after. And I mean, some will be fine with that. Some will go, well, I haven't been in since March, I'm raring to get going, let me at them, you know, give me my class, I want to start. But again, others will be like the children. Maybe actually this is a big deal. So having that understanding, I think we're very, very good as adults, recognising the fears that adults have. And I think sometimes we just expect children to handle them in the same way, but not going to be, and not to give every child exactly the same expectations. You know, I've got 2 children, and I can imagine one will just, you know, skip away into school, and the other will be a little bit more tentative and holding back. And it's that difference. And normally we would have an awful lot of information from the primary schools. We'd have had, excuse me, conversations, handovers of files, and most of those things have still gone on these meetings. But the primary schools still don't know exactly how those children are going to have reacted to everything that's happened lately.
So we've had very different circumstances. Some have had chaos. Some haven't had homeschooling. Some were sharing a computer amongst the whole family. Other kids had loads of homeschooling and were really supportive with their parents. What's your sort of advice then for parents and children's mental health and well-being around this whole topic then at the moment?
I think the big thing here is, even in normal times, moving to secondary school is really scary. And change in itself is scary. And it's okay. That kind of fear is absolutely normal and it's fine. But it's also something that needs to be listened to. And if the child has a fear or a concern, listen to it. It may not even need an answer. It might just need somebody to sit and go, yeah, I get that. That
because
makes absolute sense.
It's the small stuff and not poo-hooing it. I've written an article on my blog about how to handle returning to school and about, you know, worries, because we must hold the space for them to feel heard, and then you can do it together. It might be a terribly small thing about, I don't know, whether it's where I hang up my coat and where do I eat my lunch. But to them, that is a big deal. It's a bit like going into really uncharted territory. So rather than just going, oh, you'll be fine and don't be silly, that's daft, it's about holding that space. And I think we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, perhaps, as parents, teachers, and, you know, providers of education. So Liz, oh, sorry, what did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say, I think you're right. I think the small things are the bigger issues.
Yes, yeah.
And it is things like that. It's like you say, look, not only where do I eat my lunch, but how do I choose what to have?
Yeah, oh yes. Yeah.
You know, and the friendship groups are kind of, I think most children are okay. Most children will go with somebody they already know anyway. But there's still some that are completely on their own, and some children need help to make friends.
Yes.
You know, actually, if you've been in the same school from nursery right through to year 6, you've never really learned how to make a friend, because it just happened. You know, you talk to anybody at 2, don't you? 3.
No, that's very true. And I often work with parents and kids around friendship. It's a skill. Some people it comes very naturally. When I was training in my NLP stuff, I remember someone came up to me, one of the exercises was, well, how do you make friends? Because I seem to make them quite easily, and you never really think about it. But I remember just saying, well, I smile, I have open body language, I ask the odd question that's, you know, gets the thing going. I don't do all the talking because I know my story. And so by teaching kids these sort of very simple things about body language, tone of voice, open-ended questions, smiling, looking like you might like to engage, all these very small things that we perhaps take for granted as adults are not necessarily natural to children. So I think it's a very good point you make there around friendships as well for kids.
It's embracing the fear demon, isn't it? And kind of just giving children permission to be scared. Because if they've got permission to do it, it's much easier to handle.
And we're all in it together. I think that's what the message for me is. You know, we're all trying to work together to make this a very positive, confident experience. So now, look, Liz, I know you're very busy, and you've given us a great insight into the real world issues of that transition from primary to secondary. I think, like most places could have a transition manager, wouldn't that be? Most boroughs, wouldn't that be fantastic to bring it all together for good practice? So where can we find out more about you if people would like to ask, if you don't mind, ask you some questions or anything?
No, not at all. My email's fairly open. I'm always on the laptop, it feels. So if anybody did have any questions or anything they wanted to run past, my email is Liz_Stevenson with a V at sandwell.gov.uk. So I'm always free there. I'm on Twitter on a personal and professional level at L Stevenson 2410. So yeah, I'm happy. If anybody else does have a transition manager anywhere in a MAT or a borough, I would love to talk to them, because much as I'm in a very unique position, which is absolutely fantastic, and it can be quite lonely.
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes.
So let's hope we're all in this together, really wanting children to hit the ground running, to experience a very positive experience that they can, fulfill their true unlimited potential. So thank you so much for joining us today, Liz. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry about the technical hitches.
No, it's all.
I think we got through them. Thank you.
Eventually, yes.